Hello, today we're going to be talking about the tribulation and the millennial kingdom. Uh, Another format, this one I guarantee you never seen or heard before. Um, I'm making the preface here that the tribulation lasts 2,580 days based on Daniel's prophecy. And the problem is a lot of people don't understand it. But more importantly than that is what happens in the millennial kingdom. What is the real transition and events that take place from the tribulation into the millennial kingdom? Okay, and that's what I'm going to get into in this video right here. Okay, now I had to do this in an old way of format because I don't know how to write the HTML to do this type of a timeline. Okay, so anyway, I did it the old way. So anyway, this right here, the actual tribulation, I'll show you right here in this line right here, that it lasts 2,580 days. Okay, and we're going to be focusing on it. And you hear, people talk about, the different timelines, which you get right down here. You have the 1,290 days mentioned in Ezekiel. Daniel. Okay, it's the middle of Daniel's week, the start of the Great Tribulation. Okay, it's not what people think when they say 1,160 days, because that's the time of the two witnesses' prophecy. Now, when does the tribulation begin? Okay, it falls in the month of the Great Tribulation. Okay, the Great Tribulation falls in the month of Nisan. Okay, and this is based on a model that I created and I worked on. And you have to get into Jewish dates, calendar dates. I'm approaching this from a priestly point of view. Okay, of the Kohanim. Okay, that will be in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So these are accurate. Okay, but are contingent and dependent upon the new moons and the what we call the leap year when they occur, and you have to have a calendar to calculate that. Okay, so the middle of the tribulation, all right, it is at 1,290 days, and it will last for 1,290 days, and it falls in the month of Nisan. Okay, that's the middle of the tribulation, and there's one of 2 days it could fall on. Of those 2 days it could fall on, it would be Tishrei the 14th, which is the ancient Hebrew calendar, the priestly calendar, and the modern calendar, it's the 15th. Now, if I go by the Levitical ancient way, then it will fall on the 14th. All right? It'll start around this on the 14th or 15th, which is Passover. Okay? The way I found this is I knew the tribulation would start on the month of Tishrei, the 10th. Okay, so here I get into a calculation based on a model, okay, that was created, from, let me show you some things here, a scaffold, and this is the beginning of creating the model here, all this stuff here, all right, but I'm not going to get into that now. So anyway, the calculation adds 1,290 days minus 3 years, 6 months, and 10 days, okay, all right, which lands based on the model, okay, lands, okay, on the month of Nisan, all right, the 14th or 15th. Now, I want to highlight this here is because I told a friend a long time ago, says, I know the tribulation begins on Tishrei the 10th, contrary to what people believe. And I said, I believe it's going to fall on the month of Nisan, but I can't prove it. I don't have the ability to do it. Well, I finally found out how to do it. And so when I did it, this is what I came up with right here. Okay, and this on the 14th or 15th, which is Passover. So now we know, based on the priestly model of the Kohanim, because I'm looking at the temple. I'm not looking at what other people are looking at. Oh, the world's coming to an end. Don't worry about that, okay? What we need to understand is God's word. In a couple days, people are going to be saying, the tribulation, I was wrong. I thought the tribulation would begin here. And the whole problem lies in one thing. They're not looking to the priestly calendar, nor do they understand prophecy. Okay, salvations of the Jews. Okay, and when we separate Christianity from Judaism, because Christianity is a sect of ancient Judaism. Okay, and I can show you that and prove it to you later on, but I don't have time to get into that. Okay, but the problem is that when people talk about Bible prophecy. They're trying to exhort themselves. I'm not. All I'm trying to do is bring you the truth, okay? Is to let you know what is going to happen, when it's going to happen, okay? So the tribulation itself, the mid of the tribulation, when the Antichrist appears, okay, and defiles the holy place, it will occur on Nisan. And I'm going to say the 15th based on 14th based on the ancient Hebrew calendar, okay? And that is the reason I'm saying that is because when the priests began the offerings and sacrifices in the third temple, okay, the third temple will be renovated and become what is known as the millennial temple. Okay, they're not two separate temples, they're the same temple. Just like Herod's temple was built upon Solomon's temple. The same thing applies here. The millennial temple will be built upon the temple during the tribulation. Most people don't know that. Okay, so anyway, now that I hit on this thing right here, okay, you have the 1,290 days. Okay, then we're going to get into the 1,260 days. Now, this is important to understand. Nowhere in the book of Revelation is the 1,290 days mentioned. And the reason is that if you're thinking from a priestly point of view and you're analyzing the book of Daniel, okay, and the other law, the other writings of the Tanakh, the law of the prophets and the writings, and you're analyzing it, you're going to look at it from a priestly view, because if you don't, major and false interpretations come about, okay? So the 1,260 days is a part of the 1,290 days, okay? The time of the prophecy of the two witnesses, okay, if you get here, the time of the prophecy of the two witnesses begins 30 days after the abomination of desolation, and that is going to be in the month of ER, the 14th or 15th, okay, the Hebrew month in the month of ER. Now I'm giving you the months in Hebrew. Most people don't even do that, okay? And that's the reason I'm doing this is because I converted everything to the Hebrew calendar and started looking at it from a priestly point of view. All right. So the time of the prophecy of the two witnesses, all right, begins 30 days after the abomination of desolation, and it occurs on the 14th or 15th of the month of ER after the abomination of desolation. This echoes the second Passover of Numbers 9, 10 through 11, a provision for those who were defiled or delayed. Okay, and that's another teaching. All right, the resurrection occurs on Shivan the 18th and 19th, and this is based on the model that I came up with. So if you want to know when they die and when they are raised, I'm telling you right here, Shivan the 18th or 19th, based on this model. And I know it's correct. And the reason I know it's correct is because I already knew the time of the tribulation beginning. And I said earlier to people, I said, hey man, I really believe that the Antichrist and the abomination of place will take place in the month of Nisan, but I don't have the background or the experience to figure it out. Well, now I do. Okay, so anyway, let's go on here. Okay, so where was I at? Okay, yeah, so the prophecy begins on the 14th and 15th, okay, but the resurrection occurs on the 18th and 19th of Shivan, okay? Now, Shivan now why this is important, okay, all right, and this is because understanding the Hebrew calendar, going back into the Hebrew calendar, is Shivan is the only month with no festival, a month of silence. Remember, the Bible speaks of silence in heaven. Let the Holy Spirit speak to you. See that this is a time of silence. If you ever got it, reading Revelation, you said, Lord, there's a time of silence. Does it tie into the two witnesses? Yes, it does. All right, it's traditionally associated, okay, the month that is, all right, the month of silence is traditionally associated with mourning and waiting. When they die, all of heaven's going to mourn. All of heaven's going to mourn when they die, okay? But it's not just dying for them. It's they're mourning because they know what is coming next. So the mourning begins, the mourning of heaven, okay? That period of darkness in heaven begins with their death. Okay? And but they're not mourning. Heaven is not just mourning for the two witnesses. It's mourning because of the judgment that is fixing to hit. Because God says, now are the days of the tribulation are fulfilled. Okay, I want to show you later on this here. They're mourning because they know what's fixing to come. All right. So Sivan is the only month with no festivals, a month of silence. It's associated traditionally with mourning and waiting. This marks or closely precedes the silence of heaven. Revelation 8:1. Okay? Now, that I've talked about the two witnesses. Now we're going to get into the 1,335 days of Daniel 12:12. Blessed is he who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. All right? And I put in there, okay, this refers to the blessed star point for those who survive. Now hear this, who survive, okay, God's wrath, which lasts 45 days. And the way I know this is when you get in the calendar, you can look at it and up here, and this stuff right here, okay. So it lasts 45 days, okay. And you subtract 1,335 days from the 1,290 days, you end up with 45 days. So when the Bible says, if those days will be not shortened, there will be no flesh saved. And this is the reason why. Because you're going to have 45 days of God's wrath. This is not the bowls of God's wrath mentioned in Revelation. Okay? This is God's wrath that comes. Okay? And during this period of time also occurs is what we call the at the second coming. Okay, will come, and at that period of time, you'll have the marriage supper of the Lamb begin, and it will last, in that period of time, 45 days. Right? So the marriage supper of the Lamb will last 45 days, according to what is prophetically understood in the prophets. But the marriage supper of the Lamb continues through the 1,000-year reign, that all who are born in the reign and receive Christ can accept Christ. It doesn't just, like Jesus says, I'm the resurrection and the life, okay? The resurrection is not an event, it's a being, all right? The marriage supper of the Lamb is not an event, it's a state of being, okay, in Christ, ultimately. But when we put it into the position of, well, when is the marriage supper of the Lamb, and we're looking at a linear point, then that I have just given you, okay? The marriage supper of the Lamb will begin in this 45-day period of time, right prior to it's actually occurring, and it will last for exactly 45 days. Now the Bible says, unless those days were shortened, there will be no flesh saved. And people are like, well, what does this mean? Well, I'm just showing you right now, okay? Those days being shortened is referring to the 45 days of God's wrath, okay? Okay, so basically, God's wrath lasts 45 days and enters into the millennial kingdom. The start of this point for the 1,335 days, okay, begins in the middle of Daniel's week. So this is the purpose of the calendar up here. Okay, so you have here on this calendar, you'll see that I have the tribulation here, starting here. It's a full 7-year period, which is a total of 2,580 days. Okay, all right. Then at the middle of Daniel's week, we have what is known as the 1,335 day count, and that will last from at the same time. Okay, as the begins at the same time as the 1,290 days of the Great Tribulation. Okay, which is all this right here. It begins at the same time. Okay, so anyway, it begins, all right, during that period of the Great Tribulation, and so it goes all the way to the end right here. Okay, the 1,335 days, and then in that period you also have what is known as the 45 days of God's wrath that I'm telling you about. It's a part of it. Okay. So the tribulation for the saints ends here, okay? Ends here, okay? You know, or should I say actually here, because we're talking about the Great Tribulation, it ends here. The tribulation of the saints ends here after 1,290 days. But then you have 45 days of wrath. And that 45 days is tied into Daniel's 1,335 days. Okay? Now, if you've never seen this, well, like I said, I'm not trying to be condescending, but you got to go back to the law and the prophets and understand it from the point of a priest and the prophets, but primarily the priesthood, because in the millennium, you're going to have what is known as not only the millennial kingdom, but you're going to have the millennial temple. And in that millennial temple, a priest is the one that deals with the calendars. A priest is the one that understands the times and the seasons, you know, if they truly belong to God. Okay, so anyway, now let's go on back to this down here. Okay, so I'm gonna go back down here. All right, and you know, I covered the 1,290 days. Okay, so let me go back here. I think I missed something. Okay, so it will start around this on the 14th or 15th. Oh, that's where was I at? I just forgot. Forgive me. All right, the month of Nisan around the 15th and Passover. Okay, and these are the different calculations I've seen. So you can stop the video and look at it. All right, yeah, I'm at the 1,395 days. Okay. Let me see if I put in here what I want to show you later on. I didn't. Okay, so we'll go back to 1,335 days. Okay, so in the middle of Daniel's week, okay, you know, you have the beginning of the last 1,290 days. Okay, the 135 days, 1,335 days begins at the same time. Okay, and then, you know, I got my notes here for you to see there. Okay, now, just so I'm not rambling, let me go on to the next one. Okay, then now we're going to look at the 2,300 days of Daniel, and I got the verses here. Okay, this is a period of restoration that begins after Christ's return. This is the most misunderstood, completely misunderstood, and I dare to say there's no one out there that has seen this yet. Okay, at least on YouTube. Okay. And so you have the 2,300 days, okay? It's a period of restoration that begins after Christ's return until the sanctuary is restored. Now, most people don't understand this, and the reason I'm bringing this up about the sanctuary restored, they understand the millennial temple, but they don't understand the millennial temple is built upon the same foundation as the third temple. That's why, you know, this is restored, but this also goes back to the prophetic understanding of the scriptures, referring it to as being a restoration. Okay, so this period starts in the month of Kislev. Okay, I know the dates, I got them all here. It starts in the month of Kislev. Okay, and between the 10th of Kislev and the 25th of Kislev, depending on the new moons and the year. Now this is extremely important, and I'll give you notes on that down the line. Okay, but anyway, that period of Daniel's 230 days begins and starts in the month of Kislev, and between the 10th and 25th of Kislev. Now here, this is important. This day here is what we call I'm forgetting right now. Hanukkah. Okay, that is Hanukkah. Okay, now. And that's very, very important when you understand what Hanukkah is. Okay, so anyway, now this period will not occur, you know, until certain things occur. But so I'm losing my track. Okay, now, following this occurs a little over a year following Christ's return. And the reason I know this is because of the model that I told you I created. Okay, and this is correct. All right, the 2,300 days will not occur till a little over a year following Christ's return, and I'll explain that here later on. Okay, now I got some notes here I'm going to get into to show you. Okay, but let me show you the calendar here first and how it works. So, you know, as I said, I already gave you the 1,335 days. Begins exactly at the same time as the Great Tribulation, and it extends past the Great Tribulation by 45 days. I know I'm repeating, okay? Now, then you have the 1,290 days of the Great Tribulation, okay? And why do I have this here 30? The reason I have 30 is because when the abomination of desolation occurs, all right, you're going to have a 30-day period. It could be 29 and a half days, okay? So, but you have a 30-day period in whole, okay, in which the two witnesses will not be there. They're not fully made manifest to everyone yet, okay? All right. And so in that 30-day period, the Antichrist first begins his abomination of desolation. 30 days year later, the two witnesses will appear on the Temple Mount and speak against the Antichrist and what he's doing and run him off, among many other things, okay? So this is the 1,209-day period. After that 30-day period, okay, is the beginning of their prophecy, okay? And then they die. And like I said, I mentioned earlier, when they die, okay, they die. All right, from here, 1 year, okay, all right, they die 3.5, and then they're raised. From here is a 1 year gap. And this ties into the model in which the Hebrew deal, and I go into it, and you're going to say, oh, God, this is too confusing. Well, if you want to know, I'm giving it to you, okay? So anyway, is a 1 year gap, and then after the 1 year gap, okay, then starts the 2,300 days, which is roughly around 6 years and 4 months, and that day starts on Kislev the 10th, most likely, okay? And then following Kislev the 10th, on the 25th, you have the commemoration of the commemoration. Okay, now this is after Christ is done and returned, okay? So that's like 6 years, 7 years. It's 7 years and 4 months following Christ's return. This is what I'm trying to show you, is what goes on in the 1,000-year reign of Christ based on the priestly assertion of things, okay? So earlier, okay, there's a one year period. You add to that 6 years and 4 months. That means there's around 7 years and 4 months until Kislev the 10th, okay? And Kislev the 10th is the start, okay, of this period. And I think I'll be able to show you what that period is later on, okay? But that period is a 2,360 days, which leads up to Nisan the 1st, is when all the work of the training of the priests in the millennial temple is done. All the land has been purified from the burnings of weapons of war, okay, and the burial of the dead, which, takes 7 years. You see what I'm saying? All this adds up, I mentioned the 7 years, so it ties in, all right? And so all this is taken into account here, okay? You can't rebuild the temple and start it until it's completed, all right, with the burial of the dead going on. Okay, so God has a grace period here. Okay, and that grace period is actually tied in to this period right here. All right, it's a time of judgment, a time of wrath, the beginning of restoration. All right, and it's a promise also. Though God's wrath is taking place, and the promise extends to those who remain on the earth, who did not partake of the marriage supper of the Lamb, okay, but who remained on the earth and who survived the Great Tribulation, they're given a promise. If they did not take the mark of the beast, okay, and if they said, as it mentions in Hosea, blessed is he who says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, okay, then they have this promise. And the promise is that they will arrive, okay, to that period of time to see this 1,335 days. They will actually arrive to see this right here, the 2,300 days, okay? And that 3,200 days, why is this promise so important? This is the promise that regards to the worship of God our Father, the Ancient of Days, the Adonai Yomim, okay, to Jesus Christ, our High Priest, okay. But there will be another priest who's called a high priest. But Jesus Christ is actually not officiating as a high priest in this period of time. You actually have a real priest because this is dealing with the nations on the earth. Okay, and so you're going to have, they have this promise, okay, which begins in this 45-day period. If they have survived, do not take the mark of the beast, and they repented and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, then they will be allowed, all right, to reach this period, which commemorates the beginning of the training of the priests for the temple in Ezekiel's temple. It commemorates also which begins on Kislev the 10th. But when Kislev the 25th comes, Hanukkah, then they participate in the commemoration of the future temple. They have this as a promise. Why is this promise here? This promise is so important because when this full period of time is up, all right, that means the temple has been fully restored. It is now the millennial temple. All right, the sacrificial system that God intended for them to have is reenacted and still serves Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah, according to his purpose and plan in the millennium for the people and the nations on the earth. Okay, and so the promise basically says this from the start of it, and I'm going to say that start of that, okay, is Kislev the 10th, okay, and it ends, all right, 6 years and 4 months later, all right, with on Nisan the 1st. And on Nisan the 1st, what happens on Nisan the 1st? The priests have already been trained. All right? It is the it is the slaughter, not sacrifice, the slaughter of the red heifer, okay? It is a memorial for purification. It signifies and means that the temple and the priest are ready. From that moment on, the high priest of Israel and the prince in Judaism, his name is David, they will go from the tabernacle of David into the temple of God and begin their official duties. That's why this is so important, okay? They will begin their official duties in the millennial, what you call the millennial temple, which has been restored from the tribulation period. Okay, now, let me go on. Okay, so now I covered the 1,290 days. I covered the 1,260 days. And now I'm going to cover the, excuse me. My computer's acting up. And there, I hate it when it does that. Now, so it did that. Now I'm going to go 1,260 days. Okay, now that I've got into 2,300 days, now I'm going to give you some notes. Okay, the desecration begins at the midpoint of Daniel. Okay, all right, and that midpoint is 1,290 days into the tribulation, and there will be left another 1,290 days. Okay, ask yourself, why is it that 1,290 days aren't mentioned in the Revelation? It's because the reason is it's a part of the 1,160 days. It's a part of the 1,290 days. But what it's pointing out is the prophecy of the witnesses, which is important because it also goes back to the Old Testament. It goes back to the Ketuvim. All right, it goes back to all that stuff. So anyway, let's start off with this here, okay? All right, lasting 30 to 45 days, okay? Now, during the period, the bowls of wrath poured out in Revelation 16, okay? This is not the great judgment. The bowls of wrath that occur in Revelation 16 are actually before the sixth deal. Okay, now the lawless one is cast into the lake of fire. So I need to change this right here in Revelation 16 because that is not correct. Okay, that occurs before the great judgment. Okay, now the lawless one is cast into the lake fire, Revelation 19:18, 19:20. Okay, I mean Revelation 19:10. The weapons are burned in Ezekiel 38:9, 39:9, and the dead are buried in Ezekiel 39:12. The red heifer is slaughtered for purification in Numbers 19. Okay, it will be a part of the millennial deal. Okay, that's why I bring it up. The priests are trained and consecrated in Ezekiel 44 during the 2,300 days. Now, has anyone ever told you that? But it's mentioned in Ezekiel. This is a part of Ezekiel's temple. It ties into the 2,300 days. It's a prophetic event that all Christians have missed, okay, for some strange reason. And I'm trying to point it out that this is important. The key insight is this, all right? The cleaning cannot begin until the wrath of God is complete, okay? But that actual cleaning, in terms of the priesthood of the priest, in terms of the priesthood, okay? There's layers here, so it's kind of hard to explain, all right? Now, the cleansing cannot begin until the defiler is removed. The 2,300 days culminates in the full restoration of the land and the sanctuary for restoration, and that sanctuary will become what we call the millennial temple. Priestly preparation begins on Kislev the 10th, is the start of Daniel's 2,390 days. Okay, but this occurs a year after the death of the two witnesses. Okay, which you're looking at a full 7 years, which it says in the Bible that they'll burn the weapons of war and weapons of war and bury the dead of 7 years. So, because of the calendar that I created, all right, because of what I have done in proper instinct with the Lord, okay, is I found the extra year, okay, the extra year, okay, that accounts for the burning of the dead, all right. And so this is extremely important because after the burning of the dead is when the 2,390 days take place. It's a part of God's cleansing and purification process, ordinated thousands of years ago. Okay? All right, so following that, Kislev the 10th to Tishrei the 15th, how I arrived at the number of days of calculation. Okay. And I have it right here. I don't know how to explain it. I'm not good at explaining things, but if you're good at numbers and you can look at things, you can understand the calculation. Okay? I'm not good at explaining certain things, though. I have the ability to get it done. All right, so anyway, there's a calculation, okay? And let me see if I can figure out how to explain it, okay? All right, so it spans, you see right here, you have spans, in a regular year 335 days. It could be up to 362 days. All right, so anyway, now Kislev the 18th to the 19th. All right, let me see what I wrote here. Let me read this so I can say it correctly. I'm just going to read it out real slow. All right. I think I typed out slightly irregularly wrong, but anyway, Chesvan 18th and 19th to Kislev the 10th. There's roughly over a year. All right, which means a year between the resurrection of the two witnesses and the beginning of the priestly preparation, which is the 2,300 days. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, and I just should have read it. Okay, so that explains it. Okay, so Kislev Shavan the 18th and 19th to the Kislev the 10th is roughly a year. And if you remember, I mentioned earlier about burning the weapons of war. All right, for 7 years. This calendar, this model accounts for all that. All right, the schematic here accounts for all of that. Okay, so anyway, and so it begins for the preparation of the year, and at the end of the 2,300 days, and I'm basing this on ancient Jewish prophecy, and I can get into it later on. Okay, his name, one of their names is David, and the other one's just understood as a regular, as the high priest. Okay, so I write in here, David and the high priest were removed from the tabernacle of David into what we can now call the millennial temple. Okay, so Shevan the 18th and 19th, all right, is the resurrection of the two witnesses in Revelation 11 through 12. Okay, that's what that day is. It's the resurrection of the two witnesses. Okay, and mentioned in Revelation 11 and 12, just after the close of the 1,260 days of their prophecy, but yet still within the 1,290 day span. Okay, now let's go to the next line. Okay, the gap period. Noting that from this point until Kislev the 10th is not just a few weeks, reckoning a few weeks, it's a reckoning of over a year. Okay, what we're doing is we're not measuring just the remainder of time of the 1,290 days, but the larger prophetic arc leading, again how I said that, the prophetic arc leading to the start of the 2,300 days, okay, and the priestly preparation and the sanctuary cleansing mentioned in Daniel 8:14. And what I'm saying, guys, it is from God. Okay, there's no doubt in my mind it's from God. Okay, because no one brings this up. They don't put the pieces together. It is from God. Okay, so it's a prophetic arc. The 2,300 days is a prophetic arc. Okay, leading to the start of the. Actually, let me rephrase that. I said that wrong. What we're measuring is not just measuring the remainder of the 1,298 days, but the larger gap period. Noting that from this point until Kislev the 10th is not just a few weeks, it's a reckoning over a year. Okay, we're not just measuring the remainder of the 1,200 days, but the larger prophetic arc. I'm not sure how to explain that. I know what I was thinking at the time. I'll have to go back, so please forgive me. But it is a prophetic arc, okay? All right. Maybe it'll come to me as I'm going through this later on. Leading to the start of the 2,300 days, okay? And the priestly preparation of the sanctuary and the cleansing, okay? All right, and then I go on, David and the high priest moving from the tabernacle of David, and I have quotations here, Amos 9, Acts 5:18, and how it is all prophetic and ties into everything that I'm saying here, and the restoration of the service temple. This is a literal and symbolic functional shift, okay? All right, so anyway, the tabernacle of David equals open worship, direct access to the throne of Zion, in Zion. Okay, the restored temple, the priestly order, the daily sacrifices, sanctified space for the nations to come and worship. Zechariah 14, 16, and 18. What I'm doing is I'm trying to give you guys an insight into the millennial reign and the government that Christ is going to establish upon the earth, and what's going to happen in that millennial reign, and how that government will work, and how that function will function. I'm giving you the very, very beginnings here. Okay, then, all right, the focus shifts from restoration governance. Okay, the over a year gap is a transition reign period where the Messiah is present. All right, the nations are being subdued, and the priesthood is being readied for the long 2,300 day sanctification cycle, which also means a renewal cycle leading up to Nisan the 1st. So here I go into Dill's. How did I come up with Shivan the 18th and 19th? It comes from the overlapping of Revelation timeline of the two witnesses onto the calendar and then anchoring it to the other fixed points I've already established in my restoration framework. Okay, so I'm giving you a little basic there, but I know you don't want to go through all that. It starts with fixed prophetic duration. Revelation 11:13. The two witnesses prophesied for 1,260 days, time and a half. Revelation 11:7 through 12. At the end of the 1,260 days, it talks about their death and etc. And when they ascend to heaven. Okay. And what I did is I just figured out how to calculate it based on what I already knew from God concerning Tishri the 1st. I mean, not Tishri, Tishri the 10th. Okay, and this build, okay, or that means model, schema, whatever you want to call it. The 1,260 days are the second half of the 70th week. Start from the midpoint of the abomination, Daniel 9:27, 12:11, and ending, okay, just before the completion of the 1,290 days. Okay, now we'll go into a little more of the conversion. I convert to the Hebrew calendar. When mapped to the end of the 1,260 days, 3.5 days into the Hebrew year, using the framework, model, schema, okay, the date landed in mid-Shivan, okay, all right, that's when they're resurrected, okay. Okay, this is before the 1,200 day. This is before the 1,200 day marker, but after the close of their testimony. What I mean is the marker. That means the marker for the end of the tribulation. Okay, because they die in the tribulation. All right. Now, why Shivan matters in a scaffold. Okay, Shivan is the only month with no appointed feast. You know, I mentioned that earlier. Okay, it's a prophetic symbolism. It's a gap, a month that fits with transitional nature of the event and the witnesses. Okay, the ministry the ministry is over. Wrath is about to peak and the bows are about to be poured out. I need to change this right here. This is actually incorrect because the bows have already been put out. Okay, so forgive me. I'll put that in there. All right, in the reading, okay, Sheshvan 18:19 becomes a marker between the end of the two witness period and the later start of the 2,390 days. Now get this. What is the 2,930 day about? Priestly preparation. That's what it's about. It's about the priestly preparation, all right, that begins on Kislev the 10th. Okay? And if you're a Kohen, you really want to know this. All right, now, the over-year gap. Okay, from Kesvan 18th and 19th to Kislev the 10th of the following year is a transitional regional period identified with the Messiah being present, God's wrath completed, the nation subdued, the priesthood being ready. See, this is all about the priesthood being ready. And anyone who says it's for any other thing or other, they're absolutely wrong. And one day, you might be blessed with actually seeing me say it in person. Who knows? Now, now that I got that, I think I got, yeah, okay, Daniel. Okay, I got other scriptures here concerning Daniel and their context of the days. You know, so there's more there, and I'm not going to bother you with that, okay? But let's go back up to the calendar so you can see it just as a reference, okay? Now, I've told you the time when they will die, the day they'll die according to the Hebrew calendar. I mean, not die, but they are raised according to the Hebrew calendar. I tied in a lot of things, but let's review this, okay? All right. The tribulation lasts a total of 2,580 days, okay? I mean, that's all there is to it, people. If you think any other thing, I'm not trying to be condescending, but the truth is you're absolutely wrong. That's how long it lasts. That's why the Bible says, unless the tribulation be shortened, there shall be no flesh saved. Okay, and one of the reason is that is because of that very reason. And then following the tribulation of the saints, you have 45 days. And so when it says there's no, that you have that 45 days, that's another reason. Because when God's wrath pours, there's even more reason there's no flesh to be saved. Okay? Now, the Great Tribulation and the 1,335 days begins at the same period. Okay? But the 1,335 days goes beyond the Great Tribulation, okay, which is the last half of Daniel's period. It's a little more than 3.5 years. So I'm not going to call it like other people 3.5 years, although I have a habit of doing that. Okay, and then it includes that and the 45 days of God's judgment or wrath. Now there is a good chance God could bring it down to 40 days. All right, that the flesh may be saved. Okay, but that's what the Bible says. And so if he brings it down to 45 days, then what this explicitly means is this: there will be 45 days at the marriage supper of the Lamb. I know you may not see it, but one day you will if you take this seriously. Okay, now, so I get into that. Then you have concerning the two witnesses. In the middle of when the abomination of desolation takes place, 30 days after that, I have in the past come up with actually 29.5 days, and there's a reason why, but I can't remember, and I don't have it here. Okay, all right, and then they began their prophecy for 1,260 days. Now the thing is, I said earlier, why is the 1,260 days not mentioned in Daniel? Well, this prophecy is built upon Daniel's prophecy, okay, from the beginning, from the time of the abomination of desolation, there shall be 1,290 days, okay. Then this falls within that 1,290 days from the time of the abomination of desolation. But the actual tribulation is 1,335 days. This is what everybody's missing, okay. Then you have their death. Okay, and from their death, there's 1 year gap. Okay, and I want to emphasize this a lot because this will count for the burial of the dead in the millennial reign, and it also accounts for the burning of the weapons for 7 years, and everything lines up. And the only reason I know this is because it matched the model of what I put in, knowing that the tribulation begins on Tishri the 10th. I don't know the year, but it begins on that day. And I knew in my heart that the abomination of desolation would occur in Passover. But at the time that I was telling people this, I did not have the way to substantiate that, and so I couldn't even mention that. But I was firm in saying, that the tribulation begins. But there are a few people that I've told it, and now I have revealed it, that I've got the answer, okay? But my heart was right, and that God seeded me with the understanding in my heart ahead before I found it. And usually that's what God shows me, okay? So anyway, you have that 1 year gap. So when you do that, and you have that 1 year gap from the resurrection, until the 2,300 days begin, which is the training period for the priest. That's why I say, if anyone says a 2,300 days or anything different, they're absolutely wrong, unbiblical, unscriptural, and I would like to say, God forgive them, okay? But God forgive all of us, because there's a lot of ignorance going on out there. Okay, so you have that 1 year gap. So when you add that 1 year gap to the 2,360 days, what do you get? You get 7 years and 4 months until the beginning of the 2,360 days. Actually, no. You get 7 years and 4 months for the whole period, which will account for what is needed which will account for what is needed concerning the burial of the dead. You understand what I'm saying? I know I'm messing up a little bit on this part here, but I'm not going to try to redo it, but it's there for you to see, and everything is here, okay, and they're notes. So if you want, you can go back and just read it. Go down here, and I'll leave this here for you to see here, and you can see some of these notes here, okay, concerning the full context of the 2,300 days and stuff. And there are a few errors in here, as I noted earlier, I saw some and I had to pull it out because the bowls of God's wrath do not and are not part of God's wrath. Okay, and I have other things on that. I just hadn't had time to put it out or get it up. So this is just a rough draft, and maybe I'll get to have time to do it. Maybe I won't. But I felt it was important enough to get it out there before I perfect it and get it absolutely right, because there are issues taking place that I have no control over. So anyway, now you have it. All right, you have the true timeline and what is the real meaning of these things here. The real meaning of the 1,290 days. Okay, the real meaning of the 1,260 days, the 1,335 days, and the 2,300 days. Okay, I've given it to you. I've given it to you the dates on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, the actual dates of when those things begin. Okay, maybe not this. Okay, more this right here. Okay, I need to go back and do the same thing and put my model and put it together. Okay, well, no, actually, the I did give you the time. I did give it to you. It's in there. Okay, it begins on Nisan the 14th or 15th. Okay, all right, is when the Great Tribulation begins. Okay, the 1,260-day prophecy. I gave it to you there. So yes, everything I've given, okay, it begins in the month of the Iyar, the 14th and 15th. I have given you a gift from God to know the times and the seasons. Don't waste God's gift. Shalom, be blessed, have a good day, and thank you very much. Am I hitting the wrong thing?